Alrighty, it is Tuesday, January 28th. It is 8:30 p.m. Not the time that I'm usually used to filming, but unfortunately things didn't work out earlier today. So now here I am with my friend Chase, as usual. And today's subject is going to be DEI. Chase, when did you learn that you yourself were a DEI hire? I mean, a straight white male, according to Trump now, is considered oppressed. So, I mean, can you talk about your experiences with oppression and some of the obstacles that you've had to kind of work through yourself?
Well, obviously, DEI is the root of all of the problems that we have between everything, obviously. Um, I mean, I think what's really interesting is the way that they use DEI as kind of the shield and like hide what they're really kind of hinting at or talking about. Um, I forgot the specific commentator, but talking about it's probably Charlie Kirk, I believe, but commenting about like I wouldn't want to plane with a black pilot type deal, basically. Even though he didn't say it in those words, but is
I think
the
you did.
automatic, yeah, probably. But it's the automatic assumption that this black pilot is there because of DEI, that you couldn't get there on your own merits, right? That like they keep talking about this meritocracy and all these different things, but it seems to be that the only people that you think have merit are conservative commentators, people that you are in your circle. Um, I think it's a little concerning also what we label as DEI, right? Like, I mean, taking into consideration college applications, excuse me, college applications have considered DEI in multiple different ways and not just strictly on like a racial basis, but also like a class basis, a geographic basis as well, right? Like colleges take into consideration where people grew up and things like that. Having grown up in somewhere that's a little bit more rural comparatively to the rest of the country, um, those benefits go to you as well. So it's this conversation that we have with DEI, and I think diversity is viewed in the lens of like the other people other than white people, right? Um, but in that, I think it kind of sets up like white as almost like the norm, the center at which like diversity circles around, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Which it's just not how diversity works. It's a whole encompassing picture of people. Um, but like I guess that's a concern, right? That they have. Um,
Yeah. Y-
God forbid.
Yeah. I look at, DEI and I one of the biggest things that I always ask people whenever I have these discussions that are opposed to DEI is like what part of DEI are you opposed to? Are you opposed to the diversity? Are you opposed to the equity? Are you opposed to the inclusion? And what I've learned is people don't like it when you phrase it that way, but that's exactly what DEI is. And it's very odd when you go and use the actual terms that this abbreviation is made out of and um, and then kind of like have people explain what exactly their opposition is because suddenly they have it in their mind that it's something totally different than it really is. And I think that the Conservative Party has done a really good job at messaging that, making sure that people have this idea of DEI that isn't true. For example, like I said, my girlfriend's a doctor. We're becoming a doctor, like literally in a couple months. My younger brother will be a doctor next year. Um, when you go into med school, you have to take four board exams. Three of them are steps. The last one is your final board. On these board exams, not once do you get a question or do you get any points because you are black, because you are a woman. You are given points based off of your scores. That's it. In order to pass the board exams, you have to hit a certain score. And that goes for anybody and everybody. They don't even ask the questions of race. They don't ask the questions of gender. So, whenever they say like, regarding doctors, you can't be a diversity hire if you pass the board exams because you are passing the prerequisite to even become a practicing physician. Same thing with attorneys, right? You have to pass the bar exam. How many points are you given because you are black or because you're a woman? Or the same thing with pilots. You have to have a certain amount of hours. Like, do they give them suddenly just give them credit on those hours, saying like, oh, they've already hit 50 hours because they're a black man? It's very confusing to me that you have to have certain standards, you have to hit these certain milestones in order to become something, and then people who maybe are black or are women that accomplish these things are suddenly discredited because, the word DEI is thrown out there, right? And not because, they went and studied their ass off and they passed these exams and or they did all the necessary trainings to make sure that they got to that spot. And so it's very frustrating to see like, these prerequisites that are required for a lot of these fields, like a lot of these STEM fields, and it's taken away from them. And it's just really sad to see because I think that the Conservative Party has made DEI into an enemy when in reality it's given so many people a chance and an opportunity.
Mhm. Yeah. And I think another aspect with the DEI is like to not sit there and say that DEI has resolved racism, right? Or that DEI has combated people not being able to be hired at certain places. But um, that is a very valid and a very like certain industries are a very one identity, a white male, and it doesn't. It's not all of them, right? But certain industries, for example, businessmen, things like that. There's very few women or people of color, especially at the top of those industries. And people will say, well, what's the issue? Like, it doesn't matter if it's a man, woman, black person, or whatever. Those are just the people who rose to the top. But what we say and how we define leadership continually obviously impacts the conversations that we're having around who can be a leader or what type of people can be good for these positions or what type of people even frankly have merit. Um, I mean, they were sitting there saying that Kamala Harris was a DEI hire. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's the mere presence of somebody who doesn't fit their norm or their narrative that they begin to use this terminology that it's almost like a free pass that you can argue for what you're really arguing for in a different and more non-direct route. And I think a lot of people they take the arguments at face value, right? They don't really hear it because they're a lot of Americans, I think, are under the assumption of they're just American, right? But that's not, unfortunately, not the case. Like, we're all these different aspects of this identity, and certain aspects are sometimes frowned upon in America in the way the common culture's talked about it or stereotypes have made people view it. And obviously that like we're challenging those things, and I don't think it's a right or left issue facing racism and things like that. Um, but what I do see with it is people hearing people out when they're coming from a place of hate or discrimination and assuming or trying to excuse away what that those other people are arguing. It's just blatantly racism.
Yeah.
Like, we can sit there and we can try to peel apart and say, well, this is what people actually mean, or this is how they're actually trying to come about it. But they're obviously not talking about meritocracy because if it was meritocracy, wouldn't we have more diversity there?
Yeah.
Wouldn't we have people who go to certain schools be not just based upon whether your dad or your mother or some other relative went to those schools? I mean, you look at a lot of these people who go to Yale and things like that, especially now when the admissions of have been rolled back, and
Yeah.
so you don't have as diverse of groups going to these things. I mean, you see, I think, real world impacts with this as well, and when you kind of think about it with doctors, like going back to what you were talking about with medical professionals, there's studies that show that Black patients are not getting the same care that white patients are.
Yeah.
Having Black doctors can change that, or having doctors who understand different lived experiences more can change that. And I think what you really do when you get rid of DEI is you reinforce groupthink. You reinforce people all saying yes to each other when it's like sometimes you need somebody who's pushing there saying, I come from this other's perspective, and the overall approach of whatever the situation is changes. And that's not a race or a gender identity or sexuality or where you're from conversation. It's a person. It's who they are and what they bring to the table. Um, and I think we're kind of just excusing away a lot of just the plain racist arguments that people are having, really.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny because they say that Kamala Harris was a DEI hire, but you look at her, before she was vice president, she was a senator. Before she was a senator, she was the attorney general. Before she was an attorney general, she was a DA. I find it difficult to look at her and call her a diversity hire when I look at someone like Donald Trump and see that he had a couple $100 million already in the bank and had no previous political experience, but somehow he's not a DEI hire. Um, I think that is very frustrating to look at, whether it is racist, like you said, or sexist, right? Like, I mean, when Kamala Harris was announced as our presidential nominee, the amount of sexist remarks, a woman can't do this, or the pictures that they started posting all over Twitter, formerly known as, or now X, formerly known as Twitter, where she was giving blowjobs, or they were like making it so that her campaign was showing her like giving blowjobs and things like that, or the pictures of like how many guys do I have to suck before I'm able to. It's just like it's all of these grotesque, nasty things that they had to say because she didn't apparently have the credentials or the merit to have gotten in there to herself. She had to sleep her way.
Yeah. And there was a lot of conversations about her past relationships and, framing her as talking about her sexuality when it's a three times divorced man who's cheated on every single wife he's ever had. You notice how it's an issue for the woman to have had some sort of questionable relationship, perhaps, that you don't even know about, but you've heard a rumor about. But we've all known Donald Trump for years.
Yeah.
For years.
Yeah.
This is who he is and how he's been. But you want to sit there and moralize to me and say that this man who does all these things is the better candidate, the closer to the people, the whatever people have to say that he is to get to where they can support him. But I think with that, a lot of people's opinions, a lot of people's opinions about the leaders that they elect never seem to be about what they actually get done or what they legislate. It's just determined on like your opinions.
Yeah.
And I think we're also getting to a point where it's like uh, you respond to the things from each leader in terms of like whether you see that you like it or whether you like that person. In terms of like trusting that individual rather than trusting specific arguments and things like that. And I think we're getting to a kind of a concerning level, especially when you kind of regard in regards to the attacks at which and the links at which certain things are considered DEI. The Tuskegee Airmen video is considered DEI. I
Yeah.
mean, you replaced it. There was outrage. People were saying, "What are you doing that for? Those are veterans." And so then they have to do something better to kind of recombat that. But it shows you how far they're willing to go. And I think when you begin to ignore the kind of roots and legacy of our country and what America really stands for, I mean, diversity is the whole kind of shtick here.
Yeah.
Like, we can sit here and lie about it all we want, but like, for much of my childhood, we used to just talk about how we were the melting pot. And now people are like, as if being what America is bad, as if we're just not going anywhere with that. And it's like we have leaders who distract and divide people based on the, specific ideological differences, racial differences, gender differences, and they're not having an actual conversation about everybody's lived